There are unfortunately so many misconceptions that exist out there about borderline personality disorder. And one of them is that this is a disorder that only women can have and that men cannot have. So today I want to take some time to really break down this myth and to talk about the different ways in which BPD presents itself in males. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Kayla and I release new videos every Monday about all things BPD. So if that sounds good to you, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below as well as the bell notification up top. Now, like I had mentioned, today I really want to spend some time to talk about the different ways in which BPD shows up in males and females. Because the presentation is different, because we have all these biases and misinformation in society, it's really important to break down that stigma so that men who are afflicted by this disorder can get the proper treatment that they need. Research has been one of the biggest contributing factors to this misunderstanding that there's more women who have BPD than men, and in turn that this is a predominantly female disorder. When we look at these old studies, they used to state that the prevalence of BPD was 73% female and 34% male. But when we actually look at this new research, who doesn't have the same methodological errors that these old studies had, we actually see that the prevalence is about equal between male and female in the general population. The only caveat is that women in general tend to seek mental health support more frequently than men. So they tend to consult therapists and get a diagnosis more often than not. So within the clinical population, so this population who goes to seek therapy and get their actual diagnosis, the ratio is 3-to-1. So 3 women to 1 man. So there is a higher demographic, a higher representation of females within the clinical setting. But once again, it's really important to know that when we look at the general population, the prevalence for BPD is really split down the middle. The important takeaway from all of that I was just saying is really to highlight the fact that BPD is not a disorder that is only applicable to women. Men have it and have it just as much as women, and so this is why it's important to start understanding that concept and to start understanding that yes, there is an equal prevalence in both sexes, but maybe the way in which it presents itself does vary. And the problem persists because we believe the way in which BPD presents itself is the same in both sexes, which in fact makes us miss some key distinguishing factors in between these sexes and stereotypes and stigmatizes men who have BPD that much more. Because when we think about it in the general population, so the representation of BPD in books, in films, Fatal Attraction is one of the most commonly known movies that represents BPD, and it's a female character. We don't see the same representation in the popular media about men with BPD. And so we think of this as women who are very emotionally volatile, who are excessively jealous and all of these things. And we don't view men as having BPD. We don't even view this as a possibility for them because we have this misrepresentation in studies, we have this misrepresentation in media. So clinicians own biases because they are human, so they're biased towards thinking that BPD is a female disorder paired with this preconception of emotions that we have. So what I mean by this is that we have this preconception that females in general are much more emotional, they're much more volatile in their mood and the way that they present themselves, makes clinicians believe that, okay, my client, if he's sitting in front of me and he's a male, can't have BPD because this doesn't fit the mold of this idea that we have. What ends up happening then is that men who have BPD fall through the cracks and they don't get the proper diagnosis that they need, and this is really problematic. So let's talk about these distinguishing factors which makes the whole diagnosis process so much more tricky for men. So one of the factors is that men tend to have higher comorbidity with antisocial personality disorder, and they also have this higher tendency to have this comorbidity also with narcissistic, paranoid, and schizotypal personality disorders. So obviously if you have this overlap that's more common in men with these other personality disorders which have very different symptoms and characteristics, it makes sense that the way in which their BPD shows up, it's much different than for women. So what ends up happening is that we see a man who is displaying BPD symptoms, and they often get diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, while the opposite is also true, that females who have antisocial personality disorder often get misdiagnosed for having BPD. So the treatment for those two personality disorders are very different. And so if you're getting treated for antisocial personality disorder, which is not at the core what you need to work on, the process of it is going to be extremely difficult and painful because you're not getting the required needs that you need in order to heal and to go into remission. Something else that we also see is that men with BPD also have this higher likelihood of having substance abuse disorder, while women, on the other hand, more likelihood to have eating disorders or anxiety disorders. And they also tend more towards having comorbidities with dependent and compulsive personality disorders. So if we just take that for a second and really break it down. So if we have a male who has BPD with comorbid narcissistic or antisocial traits, and compared to a female who has BPD with comorbid dependent and obsessive compulsive personality traits, then yes, the way in which BPD symptoms and symptomology manifest is very different. In the man or the male, you might have much more aggressive symptoms, using people, being very critical, while females, we see more this dependent attachment style, is very anxious, needing closeness, needing a lot of validation, while the male may fluctuate in between this more avoidant, because we do see that as one of the core qualities of having narcissistic personality disorder. Men with BPD are also at a higher risk of dying by suicide. So the number of suicide attempts is the same between men and women who have BPD, but it's because men tend to use way more lethal means. They have a higher risk of successfully completing suicide. This is important to note because if they're getting misdiagnosed, then we're missing this also. We're missing the opportunity to help them so that we avoid the ultimate consequence, which is death. Men with BPD also have higher tendencies to act out aggressively. We also see more novelty seeking in males and impulsivity. They also have this higher tendency to be possessive and use criticism on others. This makes sense if we look at the comorbidity with narcissistic personality disorder, which uses a lot of tactics like gaslighting, love bombing to keep people attached and hooked. This makes sense that if there's this comorbid traits, then yes, the way in which that men who have BPD handle relationships and others will be different than the way that women do it. So we have this. We also see frequently men using sex to relieve insecurities. I want to highlight the fact that, okay, men have these tendencies. This does not mean that women who have BPD don't also have the same tendencies. It's just we don't see them expressed to the same degree. Similarly, that women's BPD tendencies, men also have some of them, but they're just not expressed to the same intensity. There also have been studies that show that there are differences in the brain of a male and a female who has BPD. There's not been enough research done in this field though, but it would definitely be interesting to know for the future what that looks like and how it really compares. And I just want to mention that, like always, all of the research and papers that I consult will be linked in the show notes down below. I know that some of you like to read those for yourself, so I always include them for those of you who want to dive deeper into the topic. It's really important to start talking about this topic more frequently because I don't feel like this is something that's addressed enough, and that men get the short end of the stick when it comes to getting misdiagnosed with BPD and falling through the cracks and ended up not getting the treatment that they really need. I'm curious to know, especially from the men who watch my channel and my videos, how you feel about this topic. What are tools, or is there any groups, DBT groups for men that you know of on the internet that might be of use to other subscribers of my channel? As always, one of the best ways to support my channel is to share my videos, especially now, given that this is BPD Awareness Month. This is really our time to speak up and have our voices heard, and share information that helps others understand the reality of what it's like to have BPD so that we can break down the stigma. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today. I wish you all an amazing week, and I will see you next time for another episode of On the Line.